LIV Golf is cracking, and now the PGA Tour decides who comes back. LIV Golf was supposed to change professional golf forever. It had the money. It had the biggest names. It had guaranteed contracts that could make even the richest golfers stop and think. And when players walked away from the PGA Tour, LIV seemed to be proving one simple point. Golf had a new power center. But now, for years after LIV launched, something has changed. The Saudi Public Investment Fund is ending its direct funding after the 2026 season. LIV has been forced to search for new investment. Its 2026 schedule was shortened after the cancellation of the team championship. Reports have raised questions about unpaid bills, player payments, and the league's ability to transition from enormous guaranteed contracts to a very different financial model. And suddenly, players who once had enormous leverage are facing a question nobody expected them to ask. What happens if LIV can't give them the future they were promised? That is where this story gets really interesting. Because the PGA Tour is no longer speaking like an organization desperately trying to stop LIV. It is speaking like an organization that believes the balance of power has shifted. And PGA Tour CEO Brian Reuploads has made that message remarkably clear. But here's the part you need to understand before deciding that LIV is finished. It isn't. Not yet. LIV has secured a new lead investor arrangement in principle, with a restructuring that could give players a majority ownership stake. But as of late August 2026, important details still needed to be finalized, and the league's future depended heavily on player commitment and the successful completion of that investment deal. So this isn't simply a story about LIV dying. It is a story about leverage. And right now, the most important question in golf may be this. If LIV players want to come back, will the PGA Tour even want all of them? Before we get into that, subscribe if you follow professional golf and want the real story behind the headlines. Because the next few months could determine what professional golf looks like for years. And stay until the end, because two names in particular could tell us almost everything about where this battle goes next. The moment the balance started changing. To understand today's situation, we have to go back to 2022. LIV Golf entered professional golf with an extraordinary proposition. Instead of relying primarily on traditional tournament economics, it could offer players something the PGA Tour struggled to match: massive guaranteed money. The league attracted major champions and household names. Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, Cameron Smith, Bryson DeChambeau, and eventually Jon Rahm. For players, the attraction was obvious. Guaranteed contracts, large signing payments, team ownership opportunities, a different schedule, and the chance to build something outside the traditional structure of professional golf. The PGA Tour responded by suspending players who joined LIV. The sport split. Fans argued. Players took sides. And for a while, it looked like the biggest question in golf was whether the PGA Tour could survive the challenge. But LIV's financial model always carried one enormous question. What happens when the original money stops? That question became real in 2026. In April, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund confirmed it would fund LIV only through the end of the 2026 season. The PIF said the substantial long-term investment required by LIV was no longer consistent with its investment strategy. That was the turning point, because suddenly LIV had to prove something it had not previously needed to prove at the same level: that it could function as a sustainable sports business without the same level of sovereign backing. And that is a completely different challenge. The $5 billion question. Reports have put the scale of Saudi investment in LIV at roughly $5 billion. That is an extraordinary amount of money. But spending enormous sums and building a sustainable sports business are two very different things. The early LIV strategy was about disruption. Get the stars. Create headlines. Offer enormous purses. Force the PGA Tour to respond. But eventually, the league had to answer another question. Can the business survive on its own? By the summer of 2026, that question had become urgent. LIV began searching for outside investment. Reports indicated that the league needed hundreds of millions of dollars to continue operating, while CEO Scott O'Neill pushed to secure a new financial structure. Then came another major development. LIV announced that it had reached an agreement with a new lead investor. But there was a major difference this time. The players themselves were expected to become majority equity holders in the restructured league. That could fundamentally change the relationship between the golfers and LIV. Instead of simply receiving enormous guaranteed contracts from a deep-pocketed backer, players could have a much larger ownership stake in the business itself. On paper, that sounds powerful. But ownership is not the same thing as guaranteed income. And that's where the story becomes complicated. LIV is not dead, and that's important. Let's make one thing absolutely clear. Calling LIV Golf officially dead would be inaccurate. As of August 24, 2026, LIV has a proposed path forward. The league has announced a new lead investor arrangement. It is working toward a significantly different 2027 structure. And Scott O'Neill has continued to argue that LIV can survive beyond the Saudi-backed era. The proposed future is much leaner. Reports indicate LIV is looking at a calendar of around 10 events in 2027, with a greater emphasis on team competition and international markets. Prize money would also be lower than the extraordinary levels associated with LIV's original model. And the league is exploring ways to work with traditional tours rather than simply operating as a completely separate universe. So the real story is not LIV is over. The real story is the old version of LIV is over. And that distinction matters, because the players who joined LIV in 2022 were signing up for one version of the business. The players entering 2027 could be joining something very different. Then the PGA Tour made its move. While LIV was dealing with its financial transition, the PGA Tour was making its own calculations. And Brian Reuploads became one of the most important people in the entire story. Reuploads took over as PGA Tour CEO in 2025 after a long career in the NFL. His arrival represented a change in tone. Rather than treating LIV simply as an enemy that had to be defeated, the PGA Tour increasingly focused on the value of the players, the strength of its membership, and the commercial future of the tour. Then came the quote that captured the entire philosophy. Reuploads said the PGA Tour is interested in having the best players who can help the tour. And then came the sentence that changed the conversation. Not every player can do that. Think about what that means. The PGA Tour isn't saying, everyone is welcome. It is saying, we will decide who adds value. That is an enormous shift. For years, LIV players had the financial leverage. If the PGA Tour wanted them, LIV could simply offer more money. Now, the situation is different. If LIV's financial guarantees shrink and some players decide they want a traditional tour future, they may need the PGA Tour more than the PGA Tour needs them. And that changes the negotiation completely. Brooks Koepka already showed the price of coming home. If you want to know what a return to the PGA Tour can look like, don't speculate. Look at Brooks Koepka. Koepka left LIV and returned to the PGA Tour in 2026 through the returning member program. And the tour did not simply say, welcome back. There were conditions. Koepka agreed to make a $5 million charitable contribution. He was excluded from the 2026 FedEx Cup bonus pool. And he was made ineligible for the PGA Tour's player equity program for 5 years. The PGA Tour estimated the potential value of the equity restrictions could reach roughly $50 million to $85 million depending on performance and tour growth. That is not a symbolic penalty. That is a serious financial consequence. And it sent a message to every other LIV player. Coming back is possible, but coming back has a price. And the door was never open for everyone. This is another detail that gets lost in the headlines. The returning member program was extremely narrow. It applied to players who had been away from the PGA Tour for at least 2 years and had won a major championship or the Players' Championship between 2022 and 2025. Only 4 LIV players met those criteria: Brooks Koepka, Jon Rahm, Bryson DeChambeau, and Cameron Smith. The window closed on February 2nd. Koepka accepted. Rahm, DeChambeau, and Smith did not. And the PGA Tour explicitly said the program was a one-time, defined window and did not establish a precedent for future situations. That last part may become incredibly important, because if more LIV players want to return after 2026, they cannot simply assume that the Koepka deal will still be available. The rules may change, the penalties may change, and most importantly, the PGA Tour may decide that some players are worth pursuing while others are not. The human problem nobody can ignore. There is also another issue. Money is only one part of this. Trust matters. Relationships matter. And professional athletes remember who stayed. During the height of the golf conflict, players who remained with the PGA Tour were watching competitors receive enormous contracts for leaving. Some felt betrayed. Some felt the defectors had made a legitimate business decision. Others believed they had abandoned the structure that had built their careers. That tension has not simply disappeared. Reuploads acknowledged that reality when discussing the issue of scar tissue around the tour. He said he personally might not carry that scar tissue, but other people around the tour do, and it has to be taken into account. That statement is revealing, because it means the PGA Tour cannot treat reunification as a simple business transaction. There are players who stayed. There are tournaments that were built around the tour. There are relationships between players. And there are fans who spent 4 years watching professional golf fight with itself. Any return has consequences. Rory McIlroy's position has changed. And then there is Rory McIlroy. McIlroy was once among LIV Golf's strongest critics. But his position has evolved. He has increasingly emphasized moving forward and doing what is best for the game. That is significant because professional golf cannot realistically spend forever fighting the same war. The sport needs the best players competing against each other. Fans want that. Television wants that. Sponsors want that. And the majors have already demonstrated how powerful the biggest names can be when they are all in the same field. But there is a difference between saying, "Bring back the stars," and saying, "Bring back everyone." The first idea has broad appeal. The second is much more complicated. That is precisely where the PGA Tour now has leverage. The Patrick Reed example matters too. Brooks Koepka isn't the only sign of the changing landscape. Patrick Reed also chose not to continue with LIV and pursued a return through traditional golf. Rather than simply walking straight back into the PGA Tour, Reed has been using the DP World Tour as part of his route back. His success there has dramatically strengthened his position. That is important because it demonstrates another possible path. A player doesn't necessarily have to wait for the PGA Tour to hand him a golden ticket. He can go out and prove himself, compete, earn points, win tournaments, and rebuild his status. That could become especially important for LIV players who do not receive a special pathway. The message is simple. If you want back into the old system, you may have to earn it. Now we get to Bryson DeChambeau. This is where the story becomes explosive. Bryson DeChambeau is one of LIV's most recognizable players. He is also one of the most commercially valuable. And his current LIV contract is reported to expire at the end of the 2026 season. That puts him at a crossroads. DeChambeau has repeatedly defended the concept of LIV and has argued that the league has brought professional golf to new markets. Even amid the uncertainty, he has expressed optimism about LIV's new investment direction. So don't assume that DeChambeau is automatically heading back to the PGA Tour. That would be speculation. In fact, recent reporting suggests DeChambeau still wants LIV to have another chance and has publicly backed the league's future. But here's why his situation matters. If LIV's new structure is finalized and DeChambeau remains committed, he could become one of the central figures in the league's next era. If he leaves, the psychological impact could be enormous. Because when one of LIV's biggest stars decides the traditional system offers a better future, other players will notice. And if he stays, it gives LIV something it desperately needs: credibility. Then there is Jon Rahm. Jon Rahm may be an even bigger question mark. The former Masters champion is one of LIV's most accomplished players and became one of its biggest signings. He has also been one of the league's strongest competitive performers. But his situation is complicated. Unlike a player simply reaching the end of a short-term contract, Rahm's relationship with LIV has involved substantial contractual commitments and long-term financial expectations. and recent reports have raised questions about his future amid the league's financial uncertainty. That does not mean Rahm is definitely leaving. It means the situation is fluid, and Rahm's decision could be enormous. Because if a player of his stature decides that the PGA Tour offers the better competitive and financial ecosystem, the implications go far beyond one golfer. It could signal that the original LIV proposition has fundamentally changed. But if Rahm remains, he could become one of the leaders of the restructured LIV. Either way, his decision matters a lot. The PGA Tour's biggest advantage isn't money. Here is the most important part of this entire story. The PGA Tour does not necessarily need to beat LIV financially. It needs to remain the place where the best golfers believe their careers have the greatest value. That includes majors, competitive depth, world ranking opportunities, sponsors, legacy, media exposure, and the ability to compete regularly against the strongest possible fields. LIV challenged that model by offering something completely different. But now LIV is also being forced to evolve. And as the two systems become less financially unequal, the traditional advantages of the PGA Tour become more important. That's why Reuploads' comments matter so much. The tour is no longer acting as if every returning player has the same bargaining power. You can ask, who makes our product better? Who makes our tournaments more valuable? Who brings fans? Who creates competitive drama? Who fits the future of the tour? And perhaps most importantly, who is worth the cost of bringing back? The loyal players have a voice too. There is another side to this story that cannot be ignored. The players who stayed. People like Lucas Glover have made it clear that they understand why players made different choices, but they also believe returning players should face appropriate consequences. That is an important distinction. It isn't necessarily about revenge. It is about fairness. Imagine staying with the PGA Tour while another player leaves, collects a massive guaranteed contract, plays a reduced schedule, and then returns once the business environment changes. If the returning player receives exactly the same treatment as someone who stayed, some current members could understandably ask, what was the reward for loyalty? That is the dilemma the PGA Tour has to solve. If it is too harsh, it risks keeping the best players separated. If it is too generous, it risks angering the players who stayed. And Brian Reuploads has to find the middle ground. The biggest myth about this story, the biggest mistake would be saying, LIV lost, so everyone is coming back. That's not what the evidence shows. LIV has real problems. Its Saudi funding model has changed. Its 2026 season was shortened. Its original financial structure is being replaced. And it has faced serious questions about costs and future investment. But it has also secured a proposed new investor and is working on a smaller, more sustainable version of the league. So LIV may survive. But survival is not the same thing as dominance. That is the critical difference. The LIV that launched in 2022 was designed to shock professional golf. The LIV of 2027 may have to operate like a normal sports business. And that means proving every dollar has a purpose. The strange twist, players could become owners. There is an ironic possibility here. The same players who originally joined LIV because of guaranteed money could eventually become owners of the organization. That could give them more control than they ever had under the original structure. But it also transfers risk. An enormous guaranteed contract is predictable. Equity isn't. If the business grows, ownership could become extremely valuable. If the business struggles, ownership may not replace the income that players once expected. That is why player commitment has become such an important part of the investment negotiations. The investor doesn't just need money. It needs a viable league. And a viable league needs stars. This creates a new circle of leverage. Investors need players. Players need a viable league. And the league needs fans. Suddenly, the entire business model depends on whether LIV can convince everyone that its second act is worth believing in. So who actually has the power now? This is where I disagree with the idea that the PGA Tour has completely won. That conclusion is too simple. The PGA Tour has certainly regained leverage. But LIV still has major players. It still has financial backing through a new investment structure if that agreement is finalized. It still has an international footprint. And it has proven that professional golf can operate outside the traditional model. The real winner may not be one tour. The real winner could be whichever organization builds the strongest long-term product. And that means the next battle won't necessarily be about billion-dollar contracts. It could be about something much more important. Which tour gives the best players the best reason to stay? The next 12 months could change everything. Think about the chessboard. LIV has to finalize its new investment structure. It has to convince its players to stay. It has to build a sustainable schedule. It has to maintain its position in the professional golf ecosystem. And it has to prove that its new business model works. The PGA Tour has a different job. It has to strengthen its product. It has to keep its current players happy. It has to bring back selected stars without creating chaos inside its own membership. And it has to convince fans that reunification is worth pursuing. That is why the next year could be more important than the first 4 years of the LIV experiment. The first 4 years were about disruption. The next phase is about survival and consolidation. And then there is the question nobody can answer yet. What happens if Bryson DeChambeau comes back? What happens if Jon Rahm comes back? What happens if both stay? What happens if several other LIV players decide their best option is to return through the DP World Tour or another route? And what happens if the PGA Tour says, "We don't want all of you"? That final possibility is the one people are underestimating. The old PGA Tour could have been desperate for stars. The new PGA Tour can be selective. Roelap has already said it plainly. The tour wants the best players who can help it. Not every player can do that. That is not an invitation. It is an evaluation. The door is open, but there is a catch. So where does that leave us? The door to professional golf's traditional structure is not completely closed to LIV players. But neither is it wide open. Brooks Koepka showed that returning is possible. Patrick Reed has shown another route through the DP World Tour. The returning member program showed that the PGA Tour is willing to create special pathways for elite players. But it also showed that those pathways can come with significant financial and competitive consequences. And future pathways are not guaranteed to look the same. That's the real lesson. The players who left LIV in 2022 had extraordinary leverage. They could name their price. They could choose their schedule. They could force the PGA Tour to react. That world is gone. Now, the players have to consider something else. What is their leverage if the alternative is uncertain? The final decision may not be about money. This is what makes the ending so fascinating. For years, this entire war was presented as money versus tradition. But eventually, the biggest stars may have to choose between two different versions of professional golf. One offers ownership, team competition, and a shorter, more international schedule. The other offers the traditional PGA Tour ecosystem, deep fields, historic tournaments, and a clearer connection to the established structure of professional golf. Neither option is perfect, and neither side can guarantee the future. That's why the decisions of players like DeChambeau and Rahm matter so much. They aren't simply choosing a paycheck. They are choosing which version of professional golf they believe has a future. The end of LIV Golf, or the birth of LIV 2.0. Maybe the most accurate way to describe this moment is not the end of LIV. It is the end of LIV as we knew it. The Saudi-backed experiment changed golf. It forced the PGA Tour to rethink its economics. It changed player compensation. It changed schedules. It exposed divisions between players. And it created a new competitive reality that professional golf cannot simply erase. Now LIV is being forced to evolve. And the PGA Tour is being forced to evolve too. That means the next chapter could be far more interesting than the first. Because now neither side can simply rely on unlimited money. They have to build something people actually want. Something players want to play for. Something fans want to watch. Something sponsors want to support. And something that can survive without constantly requiring a new financial rescue. The real winner hasn't been decided. So if someone tells you LIV Golf is already finished, don't believe them. If someone tells you every LIV player is coming back to the PGA Tour, Don't believe that either. The truth is more complicated. Saudi Arabia's PIF has ended its direct funding after the 2026 season. LIV is attempting to transition to a new investor-backed and player-owned structure. Its 2026 season has been disrupted. Its future schedule is being redesigned, and several of its biggest players are facing decisions that could define the next era of professional golf. Meanwhile, the PGA Tour is sitting in a stronger negotiating position than it had during the height of the LIV battle. It can decide who adds value, it can demand accountability, and it can protect the interests of the players who stayed. That is why Brian Roelap's words matter. The PGA Tour isn't saying, "Everyone come home." It is saying, "If you want to come home, prove that you belong here." And that may be the most powerful message the tour has delivered since LIV began. The final question. Now I want to hear what you think. If Bryson DeChambeau becomes available after the 2026 season, should the PGA Tour aggressively bring him back? Should Jon Rahm get the same opportunity? Should every returning LIV player face significant penalties? Or should professional golf finally stop punishing players for choices they made 4 years ago? And there's an even bigger question. Does LIV Golf survive as a serious competitor in 2027, or does the new investor-backed version become something much smaller than the league we saw from 2022 through 2026? Because that answer could determine whether the LIV experiment was a revolution, or simply the most expensive disruption professional golf has ever experienced. One thing is certain. The war between LIV and the PGA Tour changed golf forever. But the war over what comes next has only just begun. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more golf stories, major developments, and the business decisions shaping professional golf. And leave your prediction below. Bryson stays with LIV, or Bryson returns to the PGA Tour? Because whichever way that decision goes, it could tell us exactly where the future of professional golf is heading.